The workshops we conducted with Graffitti Theatre were part of a project called Read On, which is a 48-month European project that's being delivered over 7 partner organisations across 6 EU countries. Read On was undertaken with the support of the Creative Europe programme of the European Union and the Arts Council. This interview was supposed to take place at the West Cork Literary Festival, but because of COVID-19, it's being held online instead. Our workshops involved young people working with course facilitators to analyse texts, develop interview skills, practice these skills on authors, and take a role in presenting authors and their work to the broader public.
Lovely. Okay, well, thank you for introducing that, Sophie. I'm Julie, and I'm the Creative Learning Coordinator for Graffitti Theatre Company. And this week, I've had the pleasure of working with the participants here to do some interview training and to read Deirdre's brilliant book alongside Caithan.
Yes, I'm Caithan Leahy. I am a local YA writer who wrote Tuesdays Are Just As Bad, and I am delighted to work with Graffitti and to speak to Deirdre.
And thanks so much for joining us, Deirdre. It's really lovely to have you here.
Oh, it's lovely to be here. I'm delighted.
Great. So I'm going to hand you over to Molly and Sloan, and they're going to take the interview for us today.
Okay, fantastic.
Cool.
Hi Deirdre, how are you?
Hi Molly, I'm good. I really like your bookshelf.
Oh, thanks. It's actually my parents. I kind of I stole it because they didn't have room in their bedroom. So
it's yours now.
It's like, don't mind that. How's lockdown treating you anyway?
It's okay. It's up and down, and it's gone on for a while now. But I'm quite lucky in that, anyone I know who had it has recovered.
Yeah.
And so far, kind of keeping safe. And I hope you are too.
Yeah. Sure, that's the main thing, as long as everyone's safe and stuff. So do you have an extract of the book that you'd like to read to us?
Yeah, I normally read the beginning, but I thought I might actually go wild because it's a whole new world, and read chapter 13, the creepiest chapter. So yeah, it's I think it'll give a good flavor of kind of the tone of it.
Okay, perfect.
So, are you guys okay if I start now? Yeah. Okay, perfect. Wild cherry, prepare the stalks of drupes to soothe or bind. I wake up, sweating like I have been running. Rain beats on the windows, dreams of foxes interspersed with screams. We're high up, but the mountains here cast shadows day and night. When we told Brian about the skull we found, he laughed at us. Gently, but he laughed. Typical dad, he said. He didn't ever open half the trunks he bought at the estate sales. His hand outstretched. I'll give it to the guards though, just in case. He tucked the pitted bone into his satchel. The light caught grooves upon it, carved by time or maybe something else. The moon is waxing, fatter slices building. Skulls in Catlin's room of things long dead. I blink and try to think of salt and safety. My ears strain for the breathy creak of pipes. What can my sister hear that I can't hear? Girls go missing all the time in Ireland. You hear about the right ones on the news, the ones with parents, girls who come from money, pale-skinned, pretty, missed. I've shared the photos, seen the posters peeling on the lampposts, bins and walls, sellotaped or glued, the pictures bleeding into the text with rainfall, printed out by families or friends, loving, hopeless hands that clutch at nothing. And in time, they might be found in isolated places. The mountains that we drive through on the bus. I picture them, the faint, trodden paths from years of feet that line the slopes like slender threads a foot's breadth wide, through bush and grass like veins upon a leaf. You have to know, or really look to notice. It would be the same, I think, with bodies. You'd have to look but mightn't think to look. I comb my fingers through my damp blank hair. So many missing girls, lines and lines of them like beads on string. Why do they haunt me when they're not my business? Why is it so warm here at night? Everything outside is icy freezing. The pelt of rain against the window panes. I must ask Brian to turn the heating off. I end up kicking blankets, tossing, turning. And thinking of the other girl I know once lived near her, Helen Grourk, Catelyn told me at the time that people only cared because she was hot, and was she even hot like Maddie, really? Anyone can look that way in a photo from the right angle with the right filter. A girl can turn into an ellipsis so easily. Yeah, there we go.
So much. That's fab.
Yeah, it's weird. It's so weird to be reading it on a Zoom call. Do you know, it's different, but yeah, I hope you liked it.
Yeah, it was really great, and it was so like different from other YA books I've read. So I was wondering, like, what was your inspiration behind it?
Well, there are writers that I really like. Like, I like a lot of horror writers, and particular kind of writers, female horror writers. Like, I really like this one writer called Shirley Jackson. She's amazing, and I'm very drawn to ghost stories. And there are some children's writers, kind of like Edith Nesbit, who wrote The Railway Children, who like would have also written horror stories. So I don't know if that's a thing, if people who write for younger readers also like to scare people, maybe. But yeah, I kind of with it, I wanted to do a kind of a dark reworking of something. And I think a lot of the time in books, it's about someone with a secret. But as you kind of grow in the world, you kind of know everyone has something. We all have our own things, and no one's are more important than anyone else's. And I kind of wanted to like make a town where instead of like one chosen person, you know, kind of that it was everyone. We all, like, there are layers and everyone has their own thing going on. And once I kind of stumbled on the character of Maddie and her relationship to Catelyn, and that thing of like being an identical twin but wanting to assert your individuality and kind of feeling like you live with a slightly, again, like a reflection of yourself through a slightly better filter or something. And I thought that would be a really interesting way to explore the anxiety that comes with trying new things, and the anxiety that comes with discovering aspects of who you are, like your sexuality, or coping with anxiety. So that kind of like, I do tend to start from character, but the gothic aspect of it was also there very early on.
Thank you.
Just kind of, sorry, 2 seconds, I have the question in my head. What made you decide to set it in, like, you know, Ballyfran, the small town in Galway, and have the characters move from Cork to there?
So my Ballyfran is a made-up town, and I really like this. Now, I mean, God, it's dated, like, in some ways it's dated badly, but I still do like it, Buffy the Vampire Slayer. So Ballyfran is like just, it's Hellmouth, like Baal-Ifrin. So I kind of wanted to reference that. I didn't want to draw on a real place, although there are aspects of real places in it. Like small towns in Connemara. My cousins come from this place called Woodford. And I kind of thought about that a bit. They live in a very rambling old house covered in ivy. And I was thinking of that, like that kind of journey to a small town, and like watching kind of the house become sparser and sparser and sparser until you come into a village. And then, yeah, and I wanted to be able to build it from the ground up. And I felt like if I started with an actual place, that I'd have more of a responsibility. I knew I wanted them to have a big change. And I grew up in Galway, but I felt like Galway to outside Galway wasn't a big enough change. And my husband is from Cork. And he, I remember the first time that I like visited it with him, I was so struck by the difference of the landscape. Like, his dad's a farmer, and there were these lush green fields, and my granddad's a farmer, but the fields were not as lush, you know, and I kind of wanted that. I wanted that difference in the landscape. And I do think that like the place that you're from does shape you in a way. And when you move, you have to kind of adapt to a different set of people, a different culture, and a different mindset, even if it's within the same country. So I wanted to unsettle and displace them. And I thought that the story that I wanted to tell would be easier if they had that sense of displacement from the very beginning, if that makes sense.
Yes, thank you.
And, you know, with the magic, I really liked that sort of aspect of it. And I was wondering, did you make it up? Is it based in some sort of old Celtic magic, or?
I'm so glad that you thought that. No, no, I made it up. These are really good questions, by the way. Well done, guys. But yeah, no, I completely made it up. I did draw on, like, I read a lot about herbology. I read a lot about ritual magic, but what my magical systems, I'm a writer who starts from character, so I don't kind of want to write a book about witches. I want to write a book about a girl, you know, and like the more I get to know her, the more it becomes apparent what's going to happen over the course of this. So my magic is very character based. So say, for example, Maddie, like, she's someone who likes to do the practical thing and kind of to understand the bargain that's being made when she goes into something. Like, she doesn't just leap head first the way that Caitlin does. So her brand of magic is kind of like, it's like an equation. You put something in, you get something out. And sometimes what you put in might be blood or hair or teeth. Like, it mightn't always be pretty, but you're fairly sure that when you make that sacrifice, you know what you're giving up. Whereas prayer magic would be for people who are a little bit more spontaneous, a little bit more adventurous, and don't think about the consequences as much. Because prayer magic is like a door that opens and a magic hand comes through it and does the thing you want it to do, but the door never fully closes and the hand might come back and want something from you. So it's a bigger risk. And then the third kind of magic is blood magic. So it's the magic that we get from preying off other people, you know. And there are people who take, you know, there are introverted people who take their power from themselves. There are extroverted people who take their power from a sense of community and interaction with other people. And then there are people who exploit other people and prey upon them. And that's something that you have to look at as well. So I kind of wanted the magical systems to reflect that. And for the people who have a talent for each particular magic, like, it's guided by their personality, but also the decision to engage with that particular kind of magic will shape you in ways as well, if that makes sense. I've thought about it a lot.
Yeah, no, that's so interesting. That's so cool.
Yeah, that's really cool. What was the inspiration for the character of Lon? You know, he was...
Not going to get too personal.
Oh yeah, sorry.
No, do you know Twilight? Yeah. So when when Twilight was big, I was kind of, you know, everyone was reading it and I was reading it, and I always kind of, thought about the people that I had encountered that acted like that and how those relationships had progressed. And it wasn't a romantic dream. It was quite, you know, it was not okay. And I thought about how easy it is to be swept up in love. And a romantic story. And I mean, like, everyone who, like, well, not everyone, I mean, some people like have written very good essays about it and stuff, but a lot of people who read Twilight bought so hard into the love because it was portrayed as a love story. But if you do scratch the surface, there are a lot of problematic things happening under there. So I suppose I wanted, like, Caitlin to be the person who was, you know, kind of fully heart invested, just really believing in it. And Maddie to be the kind of, well, actually, you know, and Lon was there to serve the female characters. So he became who I needed him to be to teach them what I wanted them to learn, if that makes sense. Like, I do tend to find like female characters easier to read and identify with.
Oh yeah, that makes sense. Thank you.
I was also wondering, with the girls, why you decided to make them twins and what sort of significance that had for you.
Well, it's kind of the, like, what I talked about earlier a little bit, like that reflection. But I also, like, I still have, like, I'm very close to her still, but I had a very close friend growing up. And it's a very specific type of relationship when your friendship transitions from childhood into adulthood. And I think adolescence, when you're going through an awful lot, is a particularly interesting time for a long-lasting friendship, because there are changes that happen and lessons that are learned, and like, you know, kind of, and you can't help, if you're very close to someone, but compare yourself to them, which can lead to kind of difficulty for, you know, kind of anyone really, like, because we can't measure ourselves by other people, like you'd be driven mad. But so I kind of wanted to almost to impose that comparison and that anxiety on Madeline, but also to give her a deep bank of love. Like, I mean, they love each other and they have a real and nourishing friendship underneath all of the toxicity that takes place in the book. And kind of the value of that and the value of sisterhood is something I really did want to explore.
Great, thank you.
Just out of curiosity, what's your writing process like? You know?
So it varies. I kind of say at the moment, I would, because I'm working remotely, I teach, so say I would finish my day's work and then I would, I'm doing edits and I'm working on something new. So I'm quite regimental about it, because I don't have, say, 8 hours in the day to write. I have maybe 3 or 4. So I would, for the proof, I make a list and I say exactly what I have to go through, and I go through that. And when it's done, I can start the fun bit, which is making things up. So for the fun bit, what I do is, at the moment, I'm finding reading for half an hour, reading a book, not something that has to do with what I'm writing, just a good story to kind of remind me why books are good. And to kind of break the part of my brain that needs to fix all of the problems away from the part of my brain that needs to make up the nice thing, if that makes sense. And then I set a timer and I write for half an hour, and then I read back over what I've written and I read it aloud and I edit it. And that's my writing process right now. It can look different. I think every project demands something different. With the book that I'm proofreading at the moment, which is called Savage Her Reply, and is out in October, I would have done reading for about a year before I started writing it. And that was very different to other books where I kind of launched in head first and did my research on the way. And I think, and not to sound too like arty or whatever about it, but like a project teaches you how to write it, you know what I mean? But like, you'll kind of know, if you're in tune with what you're making, what it needs from you. And then it's up to you to kind of work out how that can fit into your life. Because I mean, you guys are at school and then you'll be at college, you know, I mean, I know it's like, it's remote now, but like, there's still loads of pressure and loads of strain on you. And like, I mean, there's the day-to-day coping with, you know, this global pandemic, no big deal, but you know, kind of like, you have to find a way to make what you want to make without exhausting yourself, without burning yourself out. And I think the best way to write is to develop a consistent writing practice. So I always start with something achievable. And if I set a timer for half an hour, I might write for 2, but that's up to me. I can stop at half an hour and it's enough. You know, and I think kind of that being kind to yourself and not trying to push yourself to 3 a.m. unless, like, I mean, there are times when you'll absolutely need to do that if you have deadlines and things. But I think, you know, that can't, like, you need to maintain it. And I've built a practice that I can maintain. And that's something I've worked hard at. And kind of I've tried a lot of different things. I also weirdly reward myself with like jelly beans, like a little child. But like, I love jelly beans. So sometimes if I can't write, I will buy myself a bag of them and be like, you just sit down and then you can have these. And it's essentially dog training for an adult woman, but it works. So I thought I would pass it on in case jelly beans are anyone else's cup of tea. Thanks.
Thanks, that was great. I appreciate the advice as well. That was good. another thing, did you have a sequel in mind when writing that would maybe deal with like the twins' dad and Brian's dad and all that kind of background stuff?
Yeah, I absolutely do. Initially, I wanted Perfectly Preventable Deaths to be 3 books, and one to deal with each magical system. Because, like, you know, like I've laid it out, there's like 3 there, and Maddie kind of comes into herself. So book 2 would be kind of the next and the next. But I ended up over the editing process incorporating a lot of what I would have put in book 2 in book 1. And all of the questions about the twins' dad, well, maybe not all of them, but many of them. And the questions about the magical system, like, they will be answered. Hockey have contracted me to write a sequel for Perfectly Preventable Deaths, which I'm really excited to start soon. So I'm delighted about that, because I feel like it's a book that needs a companion book. Like, the story is not finished when you reach the end.
That's great. Looking forward to it.
Oh, thank you.
Good. This might be a good time to open the questions to audiences. Open the audience to questions. We don't have a mic to pass around, so we'll just have to have people shout.
Hey, hello. I really enjoyed your book, by the way. I loved it. It was so good. And I was just wondering, apart from the fantastical aspects, maybe, I don't know, how much of the book was autobiographical?
I don't want to
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely grand, and that's a really interesting question, and one that writers, and particularly women writers, get asked a lot. But I write fiction because I don't want to write nonfiction. And yeah, I put an awful lot of myself and things that I've been through into the book. But I kind of feel like if I give everyone the water from the well, when I want to go back for the next book, there'll be nothing in there. Do you know, if that makes sense? And I don't want to be, you know, I think it's a really good and a really interesting question. It's just one I don't want to answer very much. Sorry.
Thanks. Thank you.
Sorry.
Any other questions from the audience, guys?
Yeah.
Ellie.
Hi, Deirdre. I loved your book.
Oh, thank you so much.
You're very welcome. And one of my favourite bits, I think, that I really enjoyed was the relationships, and especially Madeline, like, revealing her sexuality, like, slowly throughout it, and not in like an issue-based way, not necessarily. And I was wondering about, like, especially I love, like, the descriptions of her, like, describing Una, especially at the start. And I was wondering, like, what that process was like for you, because it was very true to, like, what I think, like, a teenage experience is like. And I was wondering what that was like to write, like, from an adult perspective.
It actually was, it was lovely. And I wanted to give her, I wanted her to have a friend who wasn't Caitlin. And, like, them falling in love was actually, it wasn't something I planned. Like, sometimes when you get to know a character really well, they kind of end up surprising you. So I was writing Madeline and I was describing Una, and then I just realized, kind of like she realizes herself, that she was falling in love with her, and that this would kind of, like, it's not it, like, I wanted her sexuality to be like a good, pure realization in her life, you know, because love is wonderful. And I know that there's more admin when it's queer love, like, you know, because you have to, like, come out and you have to kind of, like, deal with that aspect of kind of society maybe not making it easy. But yeah, I really just wanted Una to be this force for good, but not also kind of, like, I don't want her to meet the love of her life at 15 or 16, you know, and, like, every relationship you're on teaches you something. So while Una might be it for Madeline, like, absolutely with her whole heart, Una, like, it, like, her heart isn't fully free, you know. And I think that, like, that reflected some of, like, just some of my own complicated teenage love issues and stuff, you know. But I wanted it to be both good and murky, you know, if that makes sense.
Totally. Thank you. Thanks so much.
Yeah, I really love the book as well. And I really like the structure, like the chapter names and like the kind of plants. Like what did they kind of mean?
So I wanted, because as I said, Madeline's magic is kind of equation-y, like it's based in the earth and it comes from yourself or it comes from like things that you use. I wanted to explore the folklore and the medicinal properties of plants. And I wanted kind of in my head, the chapter headings have been scribbled on jam jars by Mamo and the people that came before Mamo. So it's kind of Madeline entering into the history of kind of what plants can do for humans, but also of this collective wisdom that at the end of the book she finds herself a part of. And each of the plants, the properties tie a little bit into the themes of the chapter because, you know, kind of it felt more organic and kind of nicer to do it that way a little.
Yeah, that's really cool. So interesting.
I really enjoyed the gritty aspects, like the skulls and the fox and whatnot.
Yeah.
I was wondering why you decided to choose a castle, like an old ancient castle to set it in.
Yeah, I wanted a place that was unsettling and not what you'd expect. And I kind of, because I do like writing, like I do like Gothic fiction, this journey to a castle was kind of interesting to me. And I wanted this notion, like it's a patchwork castle that Brian's father has built from other castles that he kind of has visited and seen. So this kind of idea of like a kind of a hybrid between something ancient and something modern, and also a bit of a Frankenstein house. So there are parts of their lives and parts of their history there, but they're kind of sewn together with things that he's bought from estate sales. And that gives them a great, like Brian has a lot of plausible deniability then when they find the human skull, because it's not like, oh, someone, you know, kind of my dad must have left that lying around. It's like, oh yeah, it's probably not mine, just holding it for a friend, like. But you know, kind of I wanted to and I wanted to make their home unsettling. And equally, like when you're in a domestic space, that sense of separation, like if you're in a small house, you can't really avoid the people that you live with. But when your house gets bigger, that becomes easier. And if your house is enormous, you could lose that connection to the people you love a little bit, because it's an alien space as well as your domestic space. And I think that's a journey that Maddie goes on, and like what happens to Catelyn in the end, like ultimately happens in part of her own home. And I thought that made it kind of all the more horrific in a way. Yeah, that's, thank you.
Thanks.
I have one question.
Yay.
Cool. So I think for us, like a lot of the people here, they're youth theatre members or they're readers or performers, some writers as well, and all kind of artists, I suppose, in different ways. I was just wondering if there was a moment for you, Deirdre, when you kind of started calling yourself a writer.
There absolutely was, and it wasn't until very late. And I actually like I can tell, like the questions that you guys have asked are really, really good, and I'm really grateful to have gotten the opportunity to speak with you. So thank you. Thank you for giving my book like so much care. Like it really, like it means the world to me, and I really appreciate it. I was, as you might be able to tell, I don't know, but I was quite an anxious person growing up, and I still am sometimes. But I didn't, although I always wrote, I would have found acting a lot easier to do than sharing my work, because when you act, you're putting on a role, you're putting on someone else's personality like clothes. That's like, it's very satisfying, but you're not giving of yourself in the same way that you are with writing. And I love the nodding that I'm seeing. Of me. So when I started college, I was always looking at posters for Writers' Society, But because writing was something that I held so close to my heart, and it was such an important part of who I was, I barely shared it with anyone. I read the odd poem to my very closest friend, but did not, beyond that, share it with anyone, and I did not feel comfortable doing so. And then I got to my final year of college, and I kind of felt like, this is really, really important to me, and I can't name it, and I can't share it. But why can't I? Like, can I not just be a bit braver and try? And so I did. And the first time that I read a poem that I'd written in public, like my hands were like full on shaking. I was sweating. It was not pretty. But like people welcomed me, and this idea that I'd had that when I shared my work that people would like kick me out of writing for not being good enough or not being like John Banville. Like, there were no John Banvilles in Writer's Talk when I was, you know, like, it's just like you build up these walls for yourself and then you realize they don't exist. And last night I did a Zoom quiz with one of my very, very closest friends. And she is a woman that I met in Writer's Talk, and she is the first person that ever published me, and I dedicated Tangleweed and Brown to her. Because that is the difference that it made in my life, that like welcome and that feeling of acceptance. So that's when I started thinking of myself as a writer. I first called myself a writer after I knew Prim was getting published. I was on the bus up, or the train up to Belfast, and it got stalled, and there were these businessmen, and they were really fancy, and they were talking about finance and numbers and Switzerland and businessmen things. And we got talking because it was a really long train journey, and I was going up to do my first paid gig like this to talk as a writer, and they asked me what I did, and I said I'm a writer, and I still remember it, and they looked at me and I was like, I have the best job at this table. And it freed me. Like, and I mean, I did not have the most lucrative job at that table. But it was a really powerful moment. And once I claimed that space for myself, I found it easier. And I do tend to use the word writer to describe myself, not author. And I do that deliberately. And the reason that I do is an author is dependent on gatekeepers. You need a publisher to become an author. You do not need anything beyond a pen and a heart to be a writer. You know, that's a power that you have. You get to decide that. And it means too much to me to be a writer and to have made that decision that I am one, to kind of give it to other people, if that makes sense.
That's gorgeous, and a really inspiring story as well. Thank you.
Sorry, I have one more question. Sorry, if you don't mind.
No, of course, Connor. I owe you a question at this stage.
No, you're good. You're talking about your next book, and I was just wondering what that's about. If it's a similar genre or anything.
Yeah, it is. Well, it's a bit similar. It's more similar to a book I wrote called Tangleweed and Brine than it is to Perfectly Preventable Deaths. So, my next book that's going to come out in October is called Savage Her Reply. And it is a retelling of the story of the children of Lear from Aoife's point of view. Because I felt like being forced to marry your dead sister's husband and parent his children at the age of 16 would be pretty annoying. And like, maybe you kind of want to turn his children into swans. And I felt like she got a bit of a raw deal. So it's a very angry book. And I tried really hard not to shy away from what she's done and the guilt that she feels, because it's no small thing to hurt a child. But it's been very interesting, like visiting a different magical system and kind of researching the myth and lore of old Ireland. And when I'm finished proofreading that, I'm going to get stuck into research and edits for the newest draft of the sequel to Perfectly Preventable Deaths.
Sounds great.
Thanks so much, Connor.
Thanks. Thank you.
Great. Is there any other pressing questions, guys? Or Feeling satisfied? I am, anyway, for sure. Thank you so much, Deirdre. That was absolutely brilliant. Like, thanks a million for joining us.
It was so easy. Like, it was, it was a genuine pleasure to talk to you, and thank you so much, because you had the hard work to do. I just have to talk about things I made up, like, you know.
Amazing. Thanks so much.